back to what you said about Iran and how we've never really done enough about that. That extends back to the Carter administration, but even in the Reagan administration had a mixed record. There have always been these stealthy, mythical moderates in the Iranian regime in Tehran that are just about to take power if we only throw them a bone. And that story has extended decade after decade after decade. In the Reagan administration, stemming from his Westminster speech, there was this idea of institutionalizing these pro-democracy instruments, and that led to the National Endowment for Democracy and its other components, the International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute, the Chamber one. And you still have these leftovers from the Cold War, and some of them have grown a little bit. Voice of America is still out there kicking. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which was created by the CIA and then handed over to what I guess was the USAA or handed outside, I forget, but they're still around. They were supplemented by Radio Free Asia in the 90s. I guess the question is, are these guys really accomplishing a great deal, or are they able to in the absence of an administration that's pushing hard?
Well, the one-word answer is yes, or three-word, yes, they are. My complaint about our Iran policy goes, of course, well beyond the area of human rights. We've been literally letting Iran get away with murder for decades. I mean, murder of Americans for decades. There's only two times, I think, Reagan in '88 sank about half their Navy, and then Trump killed Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards. In between those, and since those, they're still trying to kill Americans. And they are basically immune, so they keep doing it. On the human rights side, we've always been in favor of democracy and human rights in Iran, and it is the ultimate answer. I mean, the people of Iran are the ultimate answer to that regime. They hate the regime. If they could get rid of it, they would, and they keep trying. Every 3 or 5 years, they rise up again. And are crushed by this regime. And I'm sure that sooner or later that regime will fall. Whether it's a year from now or 30 years from now, we don't know. And we've never been able to predict that kind of thing. What we have not done, I think, is concentrate as much as we should on human rights in Iran. When Iranians, for example, want to know what's going on in the world, they tend to listen to Iran International, which is a Saudi-backed station in London, or Iranian exile stations from California, or BBC Persian, or Israel has a Persian language station. We're way down the list. VOA is way down the list. And, presidents come and go, and we never fix it. Occasionally we change the hardware, not the hardware, the chairs around the table. As you said, the acronyms change. We had the Broadcasting Board of Governors and US AGM, and we've got radio this and radio that, but at least in terms of Persian language broadcasting, we're not doing anything like what we could do and should be doing, because you've got, people who are all literate and desperate for information on the airwaves, in writing. Everybody in Iran seems to have a VPN to get to the internet. So we're not doing that. I think the agencies that you talked about, let's take National Endowment for Democracy, International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute. The National Endowment for Democracy now has a big program helping frontline democracy activists. And I think they do a good deal more of it than, say, the State Department Human Rights Bureau or USAID. And they do it better and they do it faster. When Joe Biden did his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and as Trump said, I think it was at Madison Square Garden, he said, we were going to get out too, but not that way. We left behind thousands of people who had worked with the U.S. government agencies. National Endowment for Democracy instantly started, saying, we're going to get you out. Here's how you can get out. Get on this flight. Get to Pakistan. We'll take care of you. We're going to set up offices in that city outside of Afghanistan so you can continue your work. And they've rescued thousands of people. I've actually met some of them. I mean, I'll tell you one story because it's worth telling. We did an event for the Afghans who were here, and it would be the summer of 22, probably, so two years ago. And one of them got up holding his new baby son, like 1 month old, in his arms, and he said, my father had to flee Afghanistan to flee the Soviets. And now I've had to flee Afghanistan to flee the Taliban. But this baby, he said, he will never have to flee because he's an American. I thought, yes, this guy gets it. This guy gets it. Ned did that. And I think if you look at what IRI is doing and the Democratic Institute, they're just more agile than the U.S. government. I mean, who's shocked by this, right? They're more agile than USAID, right? What a shocker! How amazing! And they get it done for less. Another shocker. So I think we should continue to do that kind of work, and Iran particularly, because sometimes people make the argument, well, the people of the country, they're so different, there's different culture, they don't want what they do. They want democracy. They never chose an Islamic republic. They hate the regime. And, it's someday they will thank us for all of this when they're free.
You bring up Iran. I've been dealing with Irvin Kotler, the human rights advocate in Canada.
Yeah.
And I saw Irvin about a year and a half ago, and he came in and he's got a full bodyguards, because he's on their list. The Iranians have decided they're going after him. And, you've got Mike Pompeo. I saw him recently, bodyguards. These are men who should be free to walk around society. And my question is, leading on the human rights violators. In other words, in Hong Kong, the actual sanctions, I'm not always a huge fan of sanctions, but the actual personal sanctions on these individuals. I was talking to a U.S. diplomat a few months back, and I was saying, well, what's the effect of the sanctions and on the people in Hong Kong, the government officials? And he said, Mark, the Chinese never say anything about it. He goes, I don't think they even think about it. In other words, in their world, they're doing that. He said, but the Hong Kong guys are going crazy. They can't stand it. And he said it reminded me of, believe it or not, the Iranians. He said the Iranians, their families expect to be able to go to Europe. They expect to be able to move around. And so my point is like, I saw that you used to see the same thing in Myanmar. We did a little bit of work down there. And, the fact of the matter is like they expect to be able to go to Hong Kong. They expect to be able to come to a lot of different places. What type of regimes are there for actually going after the individuals? Because it is individuals who undertake these human rights violations. Is that a way to go? In other words, like just name some bad guys. At least that gives you a lot of drama. It is the one thing in Hong Kong that has really, in my mind, hasn't changed their behavior, but it's mitigated it, I think, a little bit.
Well, I agree. Pardon me. I think this is a very good way to go because it's targeted. For example, in the case of Iran, it is still the case that there are Iranians here whose parents pay for them to be here because they're part of the regime. We should be targeting those parents and we should be saying, no. You don't get to put women in prison because they didn't cover their hair and then send your kid to an Ivy League school where he or she lives off the fat of the land. No, we don't want them out. I think it's good to do that in every case. It is a stigma I think at our end, I have to say, I've been sanctioned by Venezuela and Iran, and it's sanctioned. I thank God. I mean, I haven't been sentenced to death. I don't need the bodyguards that Pompeo has and several other Americans, John Bolton. These guys are out of power now 4 years. They still need protection. I think that along those lines, by the way, I do think that if President Trump comes back, he should make it clear to Iran that if any of those people ever gets hurt, they will all be dead. It's shocking if you think about it. This is a government, and it is threatening the lives of these American citizens for years now. And we kind of think, well, that's unfortunate. It's not unfortunate. It should be punished. I'm very much in favor of the personal sanctions. It can matter for the families, for some of these guys, their wives want to go on shopping tours. They want to stay in the best hotels. They want to have credit cards. They want to have foreign bank accounts. We can interfere with a lot of that. Not 100%, but we can make life harder. And it's absolutely worth doing. There is no downside.
I want to add to that. One of the things is that Mitch Daniels at Purdue was very, very solid, and Larry Yarn at Hillsdale and some other schools. And it's starting to grow now where there are senior officials in China, and their children, of course, want to come here. And I'm going to hope we can get it. I don't know if they'll do it, but I would like to get the list of the top 1,000 Chinese Communist Party officials and just let them all know your kids are coming in. And I'd get them, to be perfectly honest with you, I'd want the officials to be in the ages between 40 and 60. And that's because that's the people who are going to have either college-age kids or kids coming to college. So it is very targeted. It is very nasty. And to me, also the simple fact is, I'm starting to believe more and more at our top tier institutions. You know what I'm saying? That's where they want to be. And so I hate to say it, if they want to go to, a not such a good school, I'll have a certain attitude towards it. And that's very difficult to enforce, I know. But no, you are right. And it is one of the things that I wonder about. Just one still quick story on Irvin Kotler was Canadians who would see him and would meet us. If you're in Ottawa, they kind of get it. But in other places, they would be shocked. I mean, he's got a real detail. It's not just two guys walking around with him. He's got a full-on 3-car detail, and the threat's pretty high. Wow. And my fear is that, I think the reason why Modi tried to do what he did is because they figured, well, the Iranians can get away with it. We can get away with it. I think the Russians will probably be not far behind him, and I think the Chinese probably would be reluctant. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's in their nature to be more cautious. You wouldn't want to be the Chinese official who authorized this, and then the blowback comes. In their system. In other words, what's the upside? And they really don't think about dissonance as much as I think.
Where the Iranians have done something different is Putin's been killing Russians overseas. And I think that's true in the other cases. In the case of Iran, these are not Iranian Americans. These are not Iranian exiles. These are not dual citizens. These are American former officials. And it's really, if you just stand back, I think, we're kind of used to it now, but it's really shocking that we would tolerate this kind of behavior. On the children, look, there are debates. I mean, I can remember this in the Reagan administration. Some people say, well, don't punish the children. An 18-year-old kid has nothing to do with the crimes of the parents. Others said, no, bring them here and they'll learn democracy.
That never worked.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's much better. What you want to say to that kid, I think, is you're a very nice, bright young person, but we can't have you And I think you know why we can't have you, because you're smart enough to know what's going on back home. Take it up over the dinner table. But I don't, once upon a time we believed, or many people believed, if we just had free trade with China, that would solve everything, right? Because then they'd get richer, and then they'd all be Democrats, and the Chinese Communist Party would go away. Well, that didn't turn out to be true. We have had hundreds of thousands of Chinese students in the United States, and I don't see any evidence that they go back home and become democracy activists. Unfortunately, they go back home and become engineers for the People's Liberation Army. Right. So I am not in favor of it.
It's funny, we have what you say about Iran. We have a case study actually of what works and what doesn't. And I think you were at a part of, or the heart of this, or at least adjacent to this in the Reagan administration. And Mark does a better telling the story than I do, but I'm going to tell it anyway, which is that Hezbollah's predecessor in Lebanon was taking foreign officials hostage, including American officials, some of whom they killed, others they held hostage for a long amount of time. And they tried that trick on the KGB with the Soviets. And instead of sending an angry letter, I believe the Soviets grabbed one of the kids of the predecessor of Hezbollah and chopped off a finger or ear. I forget what it was. Delivered it.
They sent the ear back. They said more body parts coming, and they picked up more than one kid. They were really, they did their thing. They got their guy back.
Got the guy back. So that's what works. So we know what works and what doesn't work. Not that I'm necessarily in favor of it, whatever.
Right. But if I could shift before I do think the thing is like one of the reasons I fully agree with Elliott and, basically banning the kids. First of all, let's just be Trumpian. We don't need them. In other words, these kids, all right, we get what, 1,000. If everybody has a kid, which they don't, but we're going to ban maybe of these elite individuals, that's 6,000 or 7,000 kids that can't come here. Believe me, there's more than enough to fill our schools. We don't need them. But really, I often said that if you really wanted to start a riot in China, you'd probably start a riot in some of the U.S. admission offices, is if you just said, you're a member of the Chinese Communist Party. Here's the list. Here's your name. You're not coming. There would be 20,000 people protesting in front of the U.S. Embassy tomorrow. But at the end of the day, that protest would turn on the Chinese, because all we'll say is it's not our problem. It's yours. And I think it sends a powerful message, because really the message is, and I see this so much in Hong Kong and in China, is when we accept these individuals, we undercut ourselves so much. In other words, say, all right, you're not really serious about this,
Yeah, you're right about the admissions officers who are told go get as many foreign students as possible because they pay. But it's absolutely right.
University of Michigan just had their big New York Times piece where they talked about how DEI had turned it. The other story at the University of Michigan is they've got about 7,000 Chinese students.
Wow.
And they don't know, I was speaking with somebody there, and they said, we don't know how to handle it. They're trying to move in different directions, but there's uprisings in certain departments. So for example, the engineering schools, they don't want them anymore. You know what I'm saying? And because of the security risks, and the companies that do projects with them don't want them. But you've got 7,000, and that's a lot of money. People paying full fare. So I think it's a huge issue. But I do think, in my mind, we can't do it to the children. I think, like I say, when we get out there in the mass publication and the mass public, look, I'm sorry, their parents basically a mafioso. We don't take the mob's kids. This is the way how I look at it. But
Yep. No, I agree fully. And after all, we're not saying, well, your father's in the Communist Party, so we're not Russian. We're not going to chop your ear off. We're not sending him to prison. We're not saying you may not go to university. All we're saying is you can't do it here. And that's worth saying.